Hello, and welcome to this 54th episode of Questioning Woke Psychotherapy. My name is Michael Dwan Herrick, and I'm very pleased today to be joined by Dr. Val Thomas. Hello, Val.
Hi, Michael. Thank you very much for inviting me.
Of course, of course. Well, the reason that I would like to talk with you is you've just published an essay that proposes a new term for what we might have otherwise called activist therapists or critical social justice therapists, and you propose identity practitioner as a more accurate and useful term. And I was very taken by this essay. It really pointed out something to me that by the time I was done reading, I thought, wow, this is obvious. But it was so obvious that I wasn't seeing it. Um, so it's going to be really fun and interesting to talk about. But
Great.
before we get into our conversation, I want to introduce you a little bit. Um, you are a psychotherapist and a writer. You have been a counselor, educator, and researcher. You also are the founder of Critical Therapy Antidote in 2020. It's an online platform for dissident therapists. And I might ask you to just say a word or two about that so viewers who aren't aware of it can check it out. You're also the editor and contributed to a book called Cynical Therapies. And I will leave links for these things. And you've also written two other books because you have a specialty in using mental imagery in therapy and elsewhere. One book is titled Using Mental Imagery in Counselling and Psychotherapy, and the other one is Using Mental Imagery to Enhance Creative and Work-Related Processes. And I believe you said they were both published by Routledge.
That's right, yes.
Yeah. Did I get everything right?
Yes, you did. So I'll say a little bit about Cynical Therapies Antidote website. So this was set up 4 years ago in order to provide a platform for therapists who were critical of the politicization of therapy that was very much underway then. And out of that platform, we developed a network for therapists who wanted to kind of join together and develop their thinking and their critiques. And that also produced a collection of essays for the book that Michael has just mentioned, which is Cynical Therapies. And the subtitle is Perspectives on the Anti-Therapeutic Nature of Critical Social Justice. And our site now tracks news and developments internationally. So we would very much encourage people to come along and view the site. There are essays there, and there are blogs and also news items, and also you'll be able to join our network. So that's www.criticaltherapyantidote.org, and Michael will leave a link at the bottom
Yeah.
of the page for you.
Great, thanks. It's really a primary resource for me in getting news and information. Okay, so as I read your essay a few times, the kind of underlying premise or observation is that there's a difference between activism and therapy, or between healing and activism. And I wonder if you wanted to say a little bit about that, because that's the starting point for the rest of, I think, identifying this new term.
So I think it's very important to start to differentiate out between healing and political action. Now, this is quite complicated because there's obviously an overlap between the two terms, and we've never had to really differentiate this before in therapy. So if we think about the definition of healing, healing is very generally treatments and processes involved in making something sound or whole once more. It could be applied to the individual, or it could be applied to more general conditions. And political is associated with making decisions in a formal group context, usually within government. So the overlap is obvious for sort of therapeutic practitioners. So an example might be if you're living in the inner city and you experience shortness of breath, and you go to the doctor in order to get you need healing, you need some treatment, and you'd consult with the doctor, and the doctor would prescribe presumably some kind of medication or some breathing exercises. And that's a kind of classic sort of healing route. But you might also be concerned that the part of your condition has been caused by the environmental conditions in your local environment. So you decide you want to become politically active, and you start up a campaign in order to press the government to make changes in terms of managing the environment, and particularly in relation to pollution.
Right.
So treatment, healing, and political action obviously linked together. However, there's a different focus. So you wouldn't expect to go to the doctor and the doctor's treatment to include or be only political activism.
Right.
So this is what's happened in the therapy field, is that we've had a conflation of the two.
Yeah, that's a great analogy. Yeah, I like that.
So what I've been attempting to do in terms of the renaming is to try and sort of rather artificially separate it out in order to kind of clarify the focus of the profession. And the focus of the psychotherapy professions is obviously on this more individual healing treatment route.
Yeah. And what I like about that analogy is that you're not saying there are no social justice issues that need to be addressed,
Absolutely, yeah.
But psychotherapy is not the place or the best place for it. You make another point early in the essay that I wonder if you want to say a little bit more about, the difference between considering the uniqueness of individuals versus what I would call identity reductionism, and considering one an avatar of a group rather than as a unique individual, and how that's related to healing versus political activism.
Okay, so before I answer that, I just want to just say something about the naming that I'm suggesting. So the naming that I'm suggesting to differentiate the two is, on one side you have traditional classical psychotherapy. That's the established practices, or what the general public would view as therapy. And then we have the activist practitioners, who I am renaming as identity practitioners. So this is the sort of separating out, and the identity practitioners are the people who would be involved much more with critical social justice framing their practice.
Right. So they wouldn't be considered or sought as psychotherapists.
Well, they would consider themselves to be psychotherapists.
That's the problem, right? That's the problem, I think.
That's the problem. That's the problem in a nutshell, Michael.
Right.
And unfortunately, the general public doesn't understand that distinction.
Right. So one of the first steps, another step that separates these two different functions or roles is hopefully the psychotherapist is doing a complete, full assessment of the unique individual and tailoring the therapy to that unique individual's needs. Whereas the identity practitioner would see the person in terms of major identity categories and take a different route.
Absolutely. I mean, you've answered the question you posed.
Okay. All right.
Which is
Right.
great, yes.
Right.
So,
Okay.
so if we took you as an example, Michael,
Yeah.
you go to a traditional therapist,
Mm,
and the starting point would be they know nothing about you. They've obviously got their view and they've
mm,
got their filter, but essentially they don't know you. And so
right.
the first stage would be an exploratory one and getting some understanding of you as a unique individual.
Mm,
Obviously, this is very broad brush, but if you went to an activist practitioner, they would view you as a collection of intersected identities. So you would
mm,
arrive in the clinic and you would be white, cis, heterosexual male.
mm. Able-bodied, maybe.
Able-bodied, yes, and you could put in other kind of categories, identity categories
Mm,
into this.
mm,
Um, and you would be the same as any other person with that intersected identity mix.
right.
You know, you could have a Jeffrey who went in, who had the same intersected identity mix, and they would be regarded as uh, being the same as you
Right.
for all intents and purposes in terms of the therapeutic work. And you would then be diagnosed on the basis of that intersected identity.
So, additionally, whatever complaint or problem or issue, difficulty that you brought in would be interpreted through that lens. It would probably be seen as a consequence of your identity.
Exactly. And if you as an activist practitioner, I mean, we'll go on to this in a moment, because what's crucial is that there's two different worldviews at play here. So an activist practitioner would diagnose your issues through an identity lens.
Hmm.
So if you presented with, for example, depression, the practitioner would want to help you understand that the source of your depression is located in the membership of oppressor groups.
Right.
So your
Right.
depression is linked in some way to feelings of guilt about your membership of groups that are naturally
Hmm.
oppressive to other groups. I mean,
Hmm.
that's a very simplistic version.
Right. So if you're a white person, for instance, your depression's likely linked to the guilt you feel about the privilege and advantage that you have and the oppressive force that you may have on non-white people.
Now, I could go along to the same activist practitioner and with a similar condition of depression,
Mm-hmm.
but I have a slightly different identity mix.
Mm-hmm.
So part of my depression could be linked to being a member of an oppressive class, being white, yeah. But another aspect of my depression could be linked to my membership of an oppressed class. In other words, that I'm a woman.
Right.
Therefore, I've been encouraged to view a factor in the depression as being oppressed by the patriarchy.
Right. And in that kind of simplistic, I would say, assessment, what might go unnoticed or addressed are other factors that contribute to depression. Having lost a job, having lost a family member, having moved, having, you know, any number of other things that might have contributed, or it might be an endogenous depression that, you can't really easily hook on anything. Um,
All the
yeah,
intrapsychic
right,
components would be dismissed.
right, Right. Okay. Well, can we move on to another question?
Well,
You have more to say about that?
what I want to do really is, I think what the most important framing of this
Mm-hmm.
is to look at the fundamental differences in the two worldviews.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So the worldview of therapists, established therapists, classical traditional therapists, and activist practitioners is radically different.
Right.
And it's that difference that determines the differences in the practice.
Okay.
So, I mean, one of the questions comes up quite often is that therapy is a pluralistic field, and we've
Mm-hmm.
got multiple different approaches to
Right.
therapy. And they on the surface appear radically different. Some of them appear radically different.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh. Yeah.
So how can we make an argument that this activist practice is that different? That
Yes.
actually it would fit into the pluralist understanding of the territory, and in fact would fit into the notion that it's an evolution of therapy.
Right.
Okay.
So that raises the question, what is the common ground of the therapies that fall under traditional, even though they're very different, like psychoanalytic versus person-centered,
Mm.
and so forth. What do they
They're all
share?
they're all informed by they're all originally informed by Western modern Enlightenment philosophic tradition. Even though they will have developed on beyond that, the ground comes from that
Mm-hmm.
primary philosophical position. And in that position, or in that tradition, there is an understanding of the uniqueness of the individual. The individual
Mm-hmm.
is also viewed as autonomous and self-determining.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And there are notions of there are associated notions of progress, and also very importantly, there a lot a lot of weight is given to notions of objective truth
Mm-hmm.
and
Mm-hmm.
knowledge.
Okay.
I mean, it's not more to say about it, but
Right.
that's in essence what's important in terms of our distinction.
Right. And
So based on that, all of the traditional classical therapies are kind of united in viewing the individual client who arrives in the clinic
mm-hmm.
as unique. And they would all start from a position of exploring the uniqueness of the
Right.
individual.
Right.
And then further on from that, the general treatment process would involve encouraging the agency of the client. The agency would be located
Mm-hmm.
within,
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
encouraging more insight into all the different factors involved in the situation or condition or issues that they're bringing.
Mm-hmm.
And it would also encourage a more realistic grasp on reality and a way
Mm-hmm.
forward in life. And that's very, very, very
Uh-huh.
true. They'd all
Yeah.
approach these in different ways.
Right. Well, as you were naming each one of those things, I thought those are the antithesis of what the activist therapist does, you know?
Exactly. But
And
there's a reason
yeah.
why there's an antithesis, because activist practitioners, which we are, naming as identity practitioners, these practitioners are informed by a radically different worldview.
Mm-hmm.
And we'll call this worldview critical social justice. And
Mm-hmm.
what we
Mm-hmm.
mean by critical social justice, it's an ideology that blends certain postmodern principles, such as deconstruction, the destabilization of categories, the privileging of subjective truth. That's just three of them. It blends some of those postmodern principles with a kind of bastardized form of critical theory. And in this bastardized form of critical theory, there is a particular view of the nature of society. And the view of society is that it's like a nested structure of power relations. So it's formed of groups that are either privileged and powerful, or groups that are deprivileged and oppressed.
Right.
And that's the full extent of the understanding of the social fabric.
Right. Right.
So once you have that worldview, you are going to treat the person, and you're going to approach therapy in a radically different way. So basically, the person coming into the clinic doesn't have any personal agency. And all of their problems arise out of societal conditions.
Yep. Yep.
And their membership of particular groups, either oppressed or oppressor.
And you just add a little bit there. If you suggest that they do have agency, you might translate that into responsibility, then you're blaming the victim, and you're
That's right.
one or some other form of an ist or a phobe of some kind.
That's right. So,
Yeah.
so your job really is to instantiate or consolidate, because the person might already have these views, this worldview. You're going to work to help them view the issues they're bringing to therapy, or their difficulties in living. You're going to help them understand that as being a kind of victim of the societal conditions.
Right.
That's your job.
Right. Not to activate their agency. Yeah.
The only agency they have is to either become an advocate. So if you have membership of powerful oppressor
An
groups,
ally
an
and an
ally, you
advocate.
become an
Yeah.
ally, or if you have more memberships of oppressed groups, then your agency would be expressed through political action to make changes
Right.
in the outside
Which
world.
doesn't sound like therapy.
It isn't therapy. Sorry.
Yeah. Right. So it isn't
This is the thing.
therapy.
It isn't therapy, and we have to stop using the
Yeah.
word therapy and
Right.
therapy.
I
My
agree.
argument's very basic, really. It boils
No,
down to that.
sure. So the those who want to call themselves activist therapists are going to object. They're going to come up with arguments. They're not going to like this idea. And the common ground of diverse modalities, which unites traditional therapies and sets it apart from the identity practitioner, they might disagree with that. And in the essay, you talk about the fifth wave of psychotherapy and how they're claiming that this is the case. And I didn't read the entire piece with Floridas and Krafsik.
Yes. Yeah.
But I did see the claim that this new, wave is integrative. Somehow it has an integrative function. And I thought it does not seem at all integrative to me. It seems separatist. It seems like it sets itself apart. It doesn't integrate what came before it. In fact, through the decolonializing movement, it really tries to take apart most, if not everything that came before it and replace it. Uh, I wonder if that, if you see that as well, or if you have a different way to think about that.
No, I can share your sentiments. It doesn't assimilate, it doesn't integrate. It inserts itself into a field, and I'm thinking more generally because it's happened across kind of multiple cultural practices and
Uh-huh.
domains, and therapy is
Uh-huh.
just one recent example of this. So
Right.
to insert itself into a cultural domain and takes over
And take over. Right.
and takes over and then harnesses that cultural domain to its political goals and ambitions. Now, the way I see it is that it's highly strategic
Hmm.
and it uses its mastery of rhetoric. I realize I'm talking about it as though it's an entity, but that's the easiest way to kind of
Uh,
depict it, really.
okay. What would be a more accurate way to depict it if we don't consider it an entity? It's a kind of a
Well, it's a bit more
conglomeration of,
clumsy, isn't it? Like
yeah,
the people who develop, it would be like a longer phrase. So the people who have the activist scholars who have developed these theories have found ways of using rhetoric to insert it.
right, right.
So it's a bit long and complicated. So I think
Hmm.
that's why I call it an entity. It's easier to talk about it in that way.
Right,
Um, that's just a literary strategy, really.
right, right, right.
I've lost my
W-
way now.
Well, this is maybe a good segue to something I wanted to bring up, which is I read a book by James Lindsay. Where is it? There it is. A little while ago. I don't know if you're aware of this book.
I've followed a lot of his work on
Yeah.
education. I've not read the book though.
Okay. Well, he's basically describing and critiquing the Paulo Freire's critical pedagogy and the Marxification of education. And it seems to me that the same kind of rhetorical strategies and movements that happen there, where Marxism attempts to take over education for its own purposes and indoctrinate students in a Marxist ideology, that this is very similar to what's happening in psychotherapy. And one of the terms that you mentioned and have a link for called broaching. Uh, it sounds very much like the way um, critical pedagogy tries to raise critical consciousness in students. And there's a variety of things that are a consequence of all of this. It, it creates alienation, it creates divisiveness, it
Yes.
compromises actual education, basic learning, basic knowledge and skills, and turns it all into a political, the precursors to a revolution. Um,
Yes.
and this seems very similar.
I think it is very similar, and we might say that the activist practitioner's clinic is is the private space in which this ideology, which is this more public ideology, is instantiated in the individual. So it's an outreach, yeah.
Hmm. Hmm.
So I mean, I can talk. I'd like to talk a little bit about the methods by which this has been inserted into our.
Excellent. Excellent. Yeah.
So it's been it's been a very skillful, I think, strategy. So, and the strategies are all rhetorical. nearly all rhetorical in my view. So in the noughties, you saw activist scholars in therapy working on a new narrative of therapy, a new story.
Okay.
And the story was that we are in the process of an evolution of therapy. So we're moving on from the kind of 20th century and those different schools, more individualistic schools, and we're moving into social justice focus. And that's when the whole of the field was sold this narrative that a preoccupation with social justice is an evolution of the field.
Okay.
This was a brilliant move because who could object?
Right. Well, except we are now.
We are now, but objecting would automatically raise questions about,
Sure.
about your positioning, and you could be removed and dismissed as reactionary or a bigot.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
people didn't really understand what was happening. They're not used to rhetorical strategies, particularly in the psych professions. So people were going along with that.
Right. If
And
you
then
even ask a question, then you're demonstrating white fragility or some kind of
that's right.
misogynistic attitude that's probably unconscious, and you need a unconscious bias test to sort it out. Yeah.
So there wasn't any resistance to that for the reasons that you're specifying, Michael. So you started to see then activist bureaucrats moving in and getting positions of power in the professional bodies of counselling and psychotherapy and in the training institutions. And using that means of this is an evolution, nobody can object to it, we're at the leading edge of therapeutic practice, they were able to insert themselves in and gain positions of power. And then we started to see changes being made, political changes being made in the professional body guidance. And so the guidance started to be retooled, particularly in the American Psychological Association, along the lines of we're all now activist citizen psychologists. And there are certain methods that we can start to use with our clients to help our clients come on board with this political agenda. And one of the methods that started to be, so I don't want to mix this up too much. So it's a bit where they came in, they claimed therapy for their own. They didn't develop therapy, they didn't develop methods, they didn't develop research or tools or new approaches. They came in and claimed therapy for a particular political purpose. But there was one method that they did develop, and it was a method of broaching. And broaching is a lot of attention has been paid to this. So it's an intrusive method whereby you begin to push your agenda onto the client. And your agenda is going
I'll
to
bet
be...
they don't say it that way.
No. No. This is an agenda for bringing the client's attention to the political factors in their presenting issues and to get on board with this particular worldview. A broaching tool, and it's you can see references to this in the APA guidance on multicultural practice, second edition, published in 2017, which I find it amazing that this got passed. that they actually say that the therapist needs to use the therapeutic relationship in order to engage the client in identity talk. And if they object, then the therapist needs to draw on their skills in empathic responding and developing therapeutic relationship to overcome their objections.
I see.
So
I
you
see.
can see that this this way of working with clients is now becoming clearly supported and encouraged through our professional institutes.
Right.
So
Yeah.
that by that stage, they've pretty much captured the field,
Right.
in
And
my opinion.
another expression or extension of that is, I believe, the insinuation of all of this into the curriculums of training programs. That
Absolutely.
they've got diversity classes and all kinds of things that let students know, to prepare them for their membership in these, regulatory organizations, that this is what they'll need to do. And if they don't go along with it, they can be kicked out of the program or put through some kind of struggle session until they buckle down and accept it.
And they're also or they have been doing for a while now. And we've got empirical evidence for this as well. A colleague of mine, Carol Sherwood, undertook an independent inquiry into clinical psychology training in the UK
Mm-hmm.
a couple of years ago,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
the what she was particularly interested in was the politicization of those trainings, and she used her methodology was freedom of information requests. So
Mm-hmm.
she gathered together lots and lots of descriptions from various training organizations of their training practices. And it's clear that this politicization process is very well advanced, particularly the decolonization program,
Mm-hmm.
in terms of exactly what you're talking about, the curricula. But another thing popped up as well is that in terms of recruitment, there is an emphasis now on recruiting students who are already with the program.
I
So
see.
they are already primed or on board with this politicized approach.
Right. Which suggests that they would not accept students who aren't already on board.
That's right. That's right.
Huh. Wow. Scary.
So so just to kind of link back really to the importance. So what's the importance of finding a different name
Mm-hmm.
for the activist practitioners? And if we can establish this name, what might be the real world consequences of this?
Yes, yes.
Well, it's obviously a rhetorical strategy.
Mm-hmm.
You kind of you battle rhetoric with rhetoric,
Yeah.
and by clearly defining this as a different kind of cultural practice, it is a cultural practice. We can see that there's a
Sure.
different kind of cultural practice to the ones that traditional classical therapists are engaged with. If we can start to adopt this differentiation in terms of naming, it's the start of the process of reclaiming the field.
Mm-hmm.
Because then activist practitioners who are being named, they won't accept this name, obviously.
Right.
But it instead of traditional classical therapists always being on the back foot, resisting accusations of any
Mm-hmm.
critique. is met with accusations of bigot, reactionary transphobia.
Mm-hmm.
We need to come off the back foot now and to establish a much clearer ground and insist that the activist practitioners, if they want to claim the term therapy, they have to make a case for it, and they can't.
Right, exactly.
There
They
is no
can't.
possible case. So they've managed to not be under any form of any kind of scrutiny because they're under this umbrella of therapy. If you take the umbrella away, then there's far more light shone down on. This is
Right.
not a therapeutic practice. So that's the first reason and hopefully real world outcome. And a second real world outcome, one that I'm particularly concerned with, is that the general public will find it easier to understand what's happened to therapy.
Uh-huh.
And
Okay.
potential clients will then be better informed in terms of selecting a therapist that's aligned with their values.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Some of the other consequences that might be connected to what you're saying, I would think that the professional bodies will have to clarify their position and communicate that. And as they regulate therapists and they, you know, empower training organizations, those might also have to readjust, make some changes in their curriculum and what they teach. And this seems, you know, far-fetched. It's hard to imagine all of that happening, although it's what I would hope. And if they're taken out from under the umbrella, as you say, I don't know that they survive. I don't know that there's a market for what they offer, that people who are in distress are going to seek out an identity practitioner to help with their depression or their anxiety or whatever it is. They're kind of like it's a parasitic relationship to the
Yeah,
field,
yeah,
isn't it?
exactly. That's I think a very good summation, I think. But I don't, I mean, just to pick you up on your kind of your thoughts about how this might unfold. So I don't, my sense is that the professional bodies, they're fully captured now. There's no way that they're going to adjust. My sense is that this is going to unfold in a much more unconscious and chaotic way. And
Uh-huh,
it's going
uh-huh.
to naturally move in a direction of a fracture in the field.
I see.
And new bodies will, and new parallel structures will emerge for the traditional classical therapy that will be able to contain them. And we can, I mean, we're starting to see this. So we've got parallel structures, well, the embryonic structures. I mean, Critical Therapy Antidote is one. Open Therapy Institute in New York is another one.
Mm-hmm.
The organization for the International Association of Psychologists and Counsellors that
Mm-hmm.
was formed up about 3 years ago. That's also looks like it's a sort of embryonic
Mm-hmm.
new
Mm-hmm.
professional body.
Okay.
And we're starting to see the crisis now start to crack apart the professional bodies in the UK. So, I mean, very recently we had that trans activist attack on the UKCP.
Yeah, which wasn't successful in the
Wasn't
end.
successful, so we're
Yeah.
getting one professional body
Mm-hmm.
putting its head above the parapet and holding the ground. So,
Mm-hmm.
so the split's starting to happen now, I think.
Okay. Do you think that these parallel creations will also become accrediting bodies?
They have
That,
to be. They have to, in the
yeah,
long run,
so
they will have
yeah,
to. Yeah.
yeah. Well, and then let the market sort it out.
I think so. I think
Yeah,
reality is going to sort it out. Yeah.
right. Yeah,
And the market
yeah.
will sort it out. Yeah.
right.
But what's most
Well,
important but the worrying thing, of course, is in the meantime the collateral damage.
mhm.
All of the vulnerable clients who are um, uh, receive treatments that weaken them.
Right. And I had written down a question. I don't know if you want to elaborate a little bit on how this plays out in terms of affirmative care or affirmative therapy for trans people or trans children.
I probably want to widen that. I probably want to widen out that from specifically from trans clients to more broadly people who present with gender identity issues.
Okay. Okay.
And my sense around that is that if we can separate out the naming, it's much clearer how a therapist is going to, or a practitioner is going to work with that person and those issues. So with traditional classical therapists, they wouldn't make an exception. So somebody coming along with gender issues, they're
Mhm.
going to be treated in exactly the same way. And this,
Uh-huh.
the start is always going to be exploratory therapy, no matter what the therapeutic sort of modality is,
Right.
to get a sense of what's involved in this person's situation.
Right.
For identity practitioners, identity trumps everything else. So a client coming along with gender issues to an identity therapist, the identity therapist is going to view this as an emerging identity that
Hmm.
will need both affirmation and consolidating.
Right.
There's two separate pathways of treatment, but if they're named differently, then the people going along for treatment will know what awaits them.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
And when it comes to children or minors, that will be interesting. Well,
Well, identity
parents,
practitioners are not suitable referrals for young
for children.
children and young people, particularly because one of the critical theories, or the bastardized critical theories, is queer theory, and queer theory
Hmm.
will be informing the practice of critical social justice driven practitioners. And that theory collapses the distinctions between childhood and adulthood. So it raises very significant issues regarding safeguarding.
Right. And one could hope that there are legal limits on what kind of help can be sought for minors then.
Yes.
Yeah.
But at least this gives a clearer position or ground to stand on.
Right. Right.
Uh, It's the beginning, isn't it, Michael? I think it's
Yeah.
the beginning of
Well,
trying
yeah.
to work this through.
Yeah. And I think my title for this video is "Let's Call It What It Is," and I think that's the
Mm,
start, And I think it's really brilliant to use the same strategy in a sense that's been used so effectively by critical social justice to insinuate itself into the field and go, okay, let's play the language game then, and let's be precise about
mm,
what we're calling things.
mm.
Uh, how do we get this word out? What do we do? Do you think?
Well, I mean, I think through writing about it, through kind of podcasts, through encouraging practitioners to start to use these differentiated names.
Hmm.
I mean, those are the starting points, I think.
Right, right.
Mm.
Well, I'm certainly going to encourage anybody who's watching this video, if this makes sense to you, you agree, share it widely. Let's spread the word. So this is not just a, something we think, but something that gets said, it gets spoken and used and catches on.
It's something that we need to do. We need to stop calling activists therapists.
Right,
So that's the message.
right. Stop calling activists therapists. Yep. Boils it down.
Mhm.
Okay, well, anything else you'd like to say
No,
about
I think
this?
I mean we could elaborate further. There's so much that we could discuss, but in terms of this particular topic, I think that's we've probably said enough.
Okay, all right. I'm considering doing another video on this and talking specifically about the similarities between broaching and critical pedagogy. And
That would be, yeah, that would be
yeah,
very interesting, I think,
yeah,
because those techniques have been imported into therapy training, really, in a way
okay,
that's creating a lot of difficulties for our next generation of
right,
practitioners.
yeah. Well, thank you very much, Val. I've enjoyed this, and
Thank you, Michael. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to talk about this, and thank you for
of
your
course,
very helpful kind of framing and questions as well.
you're welcome. Okay, bye-bye.